live? Okay. So,
Welcome to Tech Station, the best vlog and podcast on tech, startups, and futurism. I'm Lauren Bates, and we're your co-hosts. Each episode will take a deep dive into a facet of the nebulous world of tech. And this week we have a special guest, Beier Cai.
Hey everyone, and thanks Lauren and Charles to have me here.
Cool. So, I'll give the introduction. So, Beier, we've known each other for quite a while. I think it's decades, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the first place we met was a company called Nap. And that was Bill Dobies and Martin. What was Martin's last name?
Earls,
Yeah,
I believe, yeah.
I think it was their company, and they were in the oil and gas industry. And we both were there, and then we both left, and you went on to do something pretty great. So you created Hootsuite, and I mean like actually created Hootsuite. You created the code, you created the technology for Hootsuite, and initially it was just you. And eventually, there was other people. At one point, you persuaded me to come join too. Like back when Hootsuite was actually a startup. And I don't think most people know this, but if it wasn't for you, like Hootsuite wouldn't exist. You put in the same amount of hours to actually make Hootsuite the success it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Charles. Yeah, I think, definitely we've been knowing each other for a while and working at the same company a couple of times. Yeah, and then, develop our friendship. And I think just for Hootsuite perspective, it's definitely an amazing journey. I was one of the early employees and as an engineer, and, kind of early days, it's kind of, essentially writing code by day and hacking by night, trying to figure out, how to delight the users, right? The Twitter users who are very demanding, and it's in such a nascent area. So yeah, I mean, and then just went kind of took off from there. So yeah, it's definitely amazing kind of 9 or 10 years there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's get some questions, and I'm going to start the questions kind of basic first. Mostly because there's different types of people who will watch this, and not everyone's going to be a software engineer like us. Some people are going to be maybe starting off their career, and some people maybe they're outsiders to tech and want to get in, or just very, very interested in tech.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to something that's very fundamental to say all this. What is tech? Like, how would you define tech?
Yeah, that's a good question. What is tech? It's like asking me, well, why is 1 + 1 = 2? Yeah, it's you work in this industry for so long, you don't really think that much about the fundamental definition. I think what tech really means is a creative process, using the tools, such as programming languages, to solve a particular problem. It can be a simple problem like like a calculator, or it can be a hard problem that actually transform a whole industry. So I think that's kind of how I would define tech in general, and it's really broad. You look at the pure kind of technology industry when it comes to like software engineering, but there's also biotech and then other type of techs. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, it's the same. It's the creative process, leveraging the tools and to solve a particular problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe people who don't create tech themselves, they probably think of stuff like Google, Facebook, Twitter. They think of their laptop, they think of their mobile phones, the apps on it, and stuff like that. But I think the description you gave is really more about how it's created, which is an interesting one, which a lot of people don't have a perspective on.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, tech is just a tool. That's all it is. Tech itself is not the end. It's a means to the end, right? That's kind of how I think about it.
Absolutely. Now, there's a lot of different roles in tech,
Mm-hmm.
and I myself am a product person, and you guys started kind of as software engineers despite your many other roles.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of define, for those listening that may not know, what do you define as a software developer?
Yeah, I think the common, especially for people outside of the tech industry, I think probably people think about software engineers as the guys, the people with the t-shirt on and then just in front of
Just
the computer
hacking.
writing code all day long, night and day, all that stuff. And that maybe that's true, in the old days.
Yeah.
But I think in the modern world, being a software engineer means like writing code is actually just a part of it. Like I would even say the majority part is it's a good part of it. I think there's a lot of other things that being a software engineer that you have to possess. For example, your teamwork capability, your creativity, the processes that you have to to think about, to follow, or to play along with others. The practice that you have to develop, and also the tools, all the tool set that you need to know and leverage, to make you more productive. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to solving a particular problem, the actual coding part is actually, it's like 20-30% of it. The rest is all about making sure it's the right problem to solve and how to design the solution so that it actually solve the problem, and making decisions on what is the team that you need to work together to solve that particular problem, right? Like those are all the things you have to consider before you write the first line of code.
Yeah, it's not just writing code.
No, not at all. Yeah, not anymore, at least. Yeah.
So we actually got some questions from the audience. I kind of crowdsourced some of it, and one of the questions that came up was around hackers. And the question asked you, "Are you a hacker?" But I think before you answer that, it might be good to define what a hacker actually is. And so I'll let you define it. Maybe I'll comment on it. I think
yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts as well. Like I'll tell you what I think about the hacker. I mean, essentially it's hacking, right? It's like, what is hacking? Hacker is just the person to do the hacking. I think hacking, yeah, if in a broad sense, there's a lot of negativity about hacking. It usually means the bad behaviors, right? The criminal activities and stuff like that. But actually, in my definition of hacking, fundamentally, it's just a very kind of concentrated, intensive, and focused effort to solve a very hard problem within a short period of time. Yeah. That's kind of how I look at hacking. So actually, in the technology industry, there's a lot of good hacking going on. Essentially, there's hackathon where people get together, and divide into groups, and each group, solve a particular problem. Like for a couple of days, no sleep. You see the Red Bulls, all over the place, the pizzas all over the place, and they solve a real world problem, by a very intensive effort, within a short amount of time. That actually happens a lot. And then on the other hand, there's the actual hack. Well, not actual, like there's the another type of a hacker, who steal people's money and credit card information, or hacking the government. That's kind of the other kind of spectrum. But at the end of the day, really hacking is just like I mentioned earlier on, intensive, concentrated effort to solve a particular problem within a short amount of time. And then, like for me, I'm a hacker. Like I hack a lot on the code. But hacking doesn't mean just write code. You can actually hack on a lot of other things. Like I think lately, in the past few years, my hacking was mostly around kind of entrepreneurship and startups, and more about the particular problem, but also people problem, right? When you have a team, where there's a lot of problems within the team, then how do you solve the team issue, right? That's kind of hacking as well. Sometimes you just sit there, for hours or for days to figure out exactly how do you solve that particular problem. Less about coding, right? So yeah, that's my definition. I'm curious about yours.
Yeah. So I've noticed. I think there's 3 definitions I've noticed, or ones I can think off the top of my head. So one that was more of a classic one was one that you're getting to, is that you're kind of a master at solving problems, like you're very, very gifted at it. So that's very classic definition. I think a lot of people who have like software development, software engineering, computer science, whatever you want to name this thing, programming, if they have that kind of background, if they self-identify as a hacker, it's more likely to be that, someone who's gifted at solving problems. I do remember, for example, I was one software development mailing list that had hacker in the name, and every now and then we would get someone joining that was asking about some kind of program to get passwords, or it seemed to be well, I didn't know this for sure, but some people speculated that might be high school kids basically trying to breach the security stuff, right? And I think a lot of the public has that conception of a hacker, that someone who breaches security. People in the field might call that cracker. I know there was an attempt to try to shift the mainstream to use the word cracker for people who breach security rather than hacker. I think because a lot of people valued that term. The other version I've heard of hacker is someone that kind of does so they want to do something quick, so they kind of do something in the way that isn't best, but it would take too long to do the best way, so they kind of make a lot of compromises, so they kind of hack the system. They hack what they're doing to kind of get it done quick. Right? Right? So that's the other one that
I agree. Like, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, I think that short amount of time, like, you just do whatever it takes to solve that particular problem. That's, it's essentially like hacking the code, where, it's not about the code perfection or well-designed architecture or anything like that. It's really just solve that particular problem, whatever it takes. If you have to duct tape it, go ahead and do that. I think, totally,
Yeah, sometimes a hacker can have like a bad connotation or a good connotation. And I think we've all probably done our fair share of the good kind of hacking, because at a startup, you kind of have to hack everything for a while until you get to a certain point, right? Where you can improve it and iterate upon it. Can you define for me what a startup is, or for our audience? If, like, I think startup is the next word, like after tech, everyone wants to get into a startup.
I think, like, the tech startup is really fundamentally is no different than, traditional startup, like non-tech startup, right? It's essentially in its very simplest form, you solve a particular problem, and a particular opportunity, and and the solution to solve that problem, and now you need to pull resources together, to tackle that, right? That's kind of start an entity and and then build something, right? It's whether it's a restaurant or actual technology startup. So I think so from that sense, it's there's no difference. I think but when it comes to technology startup, I think the unique difference about technology startup is that it's like I think a lot of people think about technology startup as building the best software, like mobile app and or web application or whatever it is, and then user will come. I think that's kind of a lot of misconceptions for for people who are new into the startup world. Oh yeah, look at someone built a Facebook and people just hoard into that application and started using it. I think the uniqueness about tech startup is that it's very easy to lose focus on the problem that you are trying to solve. It's so easy to do that. So I think for generally speaking, when you start a company, a lot of times you actually don't need to actually write a software. Maybe it's 3 months to half a year. You don't need a software. You don't need to write a line of code at all. You actually spend that time to really learn about your the problem you're trying to solve. Like like who are your customers or potential customers? Are you actually solving their problem? And then you start thinking about the solution. And then you go back, hey, does this solution actually work for you? Like, you can do prototypes, mock-ups, whatever it is, like, just fake it until you make it, right? And you fake everything, and then you realize, okay, there's actually people can pay for this one. Then you start writing line of code.
Absolutely. I have a lot of people ask me questions, or people who want to get into product or tech, or they already have a business and they're asking me for some advice. And I always go back to the problem. Like, what is the problem you're solving, and who are those people? Do you know them well enough? Because you're going to find out the direction you need to go if you focus on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've seen so many startups that it just failed at very stage where they need. I mean, they build everything. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then realize, oh yeah, this business model is wrong. I mean, it's not actually solving a real problem. That happens so many times. Like, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. I have no idea who said this, but one of my favorite kind of quotes is, "If you build it, they will not come."
yeah. Totally, yeah. I think that's the exact kind of converse of fake it until you make it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, so both of us have been in the Vancouver tech scene for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my audio.
In Canada, I think just speaking of Vancouver, I think it came a long way so far. Is it where it needs to be? I think there's still kind of a long way ahead of us. I always wanted Vancouver to be like a tech hub of the world, and I really see the potential there. But then there's challenges that we're facing. So I moved to Canada in 2000. That's kind of where that's when I kind of went to the university here. And honestly, like when I was trying to pick my major, I'm very passionate on the whole computer stuff, but at the same time, that was right after the whole technology bust, right? It's and I really question, oh geez, like is it gonna work out? But anyways, at the end of the day, I stuck with my passion, and then just go on comp science as my major. And I was worried, and then I look around, what's happening in Vancouver in the tech industry, and unfortunately, there isn't much going on. So around that time, you barely have anyone to talk to. There's not many startups. There's like the big Microsoft business object, and a few large companies, and then random companies here and there. That was it. So yeah, so I mean, I think fortunately, after graduation, got to work in a couple of places, and eventually, actually quickly, landed working at with Ryan at Hootsuite, which is really great. I think
That's Ryan Holmes.
Ryan Holmes, yeah. I think I was very fortunate to have that opportunity. But over the past 10 years, I'm seeing major differences, like major changes. I remember, like, I'll just give you a concrete example. I remember back in 2008 or 9, when you have a particular problem, like for software development, and the only people that you can talk to are your coworkers, people in the same office. When you start to go out, there's not much going on. Like there's not much connection there. But then over the years, you start to see the technology community booming, right? There's I think Meetup definitely play a major part of that. And then there's more kind of, like you attend a meetup, you start seeing people coming together to share and learn, to share with each other and learn from each other. And then you start seeing some successful companies, like I think Hootsuite is one of them, started venturing into this unknown, uncharted territory, when it comes to technology challenges that people around you, like companies within the community, hasn't really faced yet. So you're on your own to solve that. But then later on, other companies are following the same path and solve the same problem. Now you can actually share with them. So I think everybody's kind of helping, feeding off each other, and the community is booming. Like these days, every single day there are so many community events happening. People gathering around. I think that's the community part. And then on the startup part, there's definitely a lot more kind of startups and the capitals kind of being poured into the Vancouver community. So I think it's definitely booming, and every company is having a hard time to find good talents. I think that's indicator. This is definitely booming. And but then compared with let's say Toronto, within Canada, I think Toronto is even faster. It's even more fascinating. So yeah, I mean, talking about unicorn companies, I realized just last year alone, there's several new unicorn born and raised in Toronto area, several new kind of unicorns emerging.
Yeah.
And it's happening so much. Yeah.
I had my last company. So the last, I'm putting quotations in case the regulars listen. Banking system. I think that acts kind of like a bank, but isn't a bank. That got moved over to Toronto after we got investments from a very local family in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I myself moved to Vancouver from Toronto. I've lived here for over 3 years, and just in that 3-year time span, I've seen like a huge boom in like the community. But I also feel like I see that potential in Vancouver, and I want it to be that really big tech hub.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what Charles and I are hoping. Part trying to do with Railtown is keep that tech talent here and help put Vancouver on the map. And Hootsuite has definitely been one of those like anchoring companies for Vancouver. But before Hootsuite, there was Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And I remember getting one of the first like Twitter accounts with the when it was only text and your profile photo was an egg and it was only 140 characters.
Yeah.
But now it's like grown, not without its own struggles, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about Twitter? Because that's kind of where Hootsuite went eventually. But can you tell us a bit about Twitter?
It's actually interesting. Like so the first time I heard about Twitter was actually not Twitter. It was a twirl.
Oh.
So, and it's this guy Charles. he I think we were both at Maverick back then, right?
Yeah.
And then you just show me, hey, Beier, check this out. This twirl thing.
Twirl.
Yeah, it's actually a software that connects to Twitter, like using the Twitter API that gives you an interface.
Okay.
So you don't have to use the Twitter website.
Got it.
But so yeah, and I look at that, I was like, what's the point? Like, what's going on here? I think that was the first time I got exposed to Twitter unconsciously. Like, I have no idea of Twitter. And really, the first time I got exposed to Twitter for real was, literally, like, I was working with Ryan, at his agency called Invoke Media. I was working with another guy. His name is Paul Donnelly. Like the two of us, we were working on another project, and literally, like, Ryan came to us, hey, let's build a Twitter toolbox. And my first reaction was, what's Twitter? But that's how I found out about Twitter. Yeah. I think essentially when you look at the whole tech industry in the past 20 years, it's really all about media, right? It's really the media transformation. When you look at Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, even Google, the old school Yahoo, like almost all of the major tech giants are media related, right? And then you have the pure tech, like Microsoft, right? Like Intel. Those are the pure tech one. And then they support the verticals. And I think media is like the first vertical, because it just makes sense. It's all about information, right? So I think Twitter is a really it's really necessary. I think it's a tool that is needed back then, right? Because when it comes to how information disseminates, Twitter is a very viral tool that can really kind of propagate information in light speed, right? So and then that's what we need, right? I think fundamentally it's a tool that is born based on need, not an accident. So I think that's kind of how it came out, and then later on, people start using kind of usages of Twitter, not just show you cats or dogs anymore. It's actually a practical usage on Twitter, and then there's politics, there's celebrities, and there's just the day-to-day technical people use it to to share their thoughts and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
I've been told my audio does not work. I think it's working now. So I unplugged everything. There was there's people that are commenting on this live in various places. There's one public Slack that's connected across a lot of things like WeChat and IRC, and someone mentioned that I had no audio. So I think I've got audio now. So that's fantastic. So apparently the questions I was asking before were not heard, but that's okay. This is live, and I think your answers probably gave the context.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a bit more about Hootsuite, and let's go back to I think like Naverick. So Navarick. Like I think, or maybe there's no C. I think that's where we met, and I think that was your first place out of school, wasn't it?
No, my second.
Second place?
Yeah, I
Okay.
was working at another company called LifeScan. It's kind of diabetes meters.
Yeah. Okay. So we were both there, and I think what a lot of people outside of, actually maybe even people inside Hootsuite, they don't realize this, that a lot of the original engineering team at Hootsuite was ex-Naverick people. And it was really because of you. Like you basically brought in people that you knew from Naverick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was obviously you first because you're employee number one. You're the one that originally created Hootsuite. But then I think probably was Bill Monkman was the second, maybe,
Yeah.
And then Greg. What was Greg's last name? Williams. Greg Williams.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was I next after that?
Yeah, there's a few more. Yeah.
I think it was me.
Yeah.
And then Noel Poulin.
Yeah.
And then Louisa.
Tui,
How do you pronounce her last name?
Tui. Yeah.
Dewey.
Yeah.
And then I also got Radoslav Gazo to join.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at one point we were half the engineering team, but like the engineering team was like quite small. And like not all those people listed were engineers. 3 of them are non-engineers, right?
Yeah.
And of course there were other people, but like that was like half the engineering team at Hootsuite was ex-Naverick.
Yeah.
And Hootsuite grew after that. So why don't you like kind of go from there and like just talk about the history?
Yeah, I think I mean what you mentioned is actually I think this is what the technology community needs, like especially within Vancouver, where you have good. Naverick is a great company, and they produced lots of good talent. And I mean Naverick itself is a relatively smaller startup, but it did create a really good talent, and that is applied to other companies like Hootsuite, right? And now, Hootsuite is essentially doing the same thing for the past few years. They produce really good talents that is kind of, it's kind of all over the place now in Vancouver. My last company, we were on Robson Street, like near BC Place, where, Talis Garden is. And when you look at Talis Garden, you look at all the startups and including Amazon there, you see so many Hootsuite people. I would say at least 100 of those. The ex-Hootsuite people who are working all over the place. So I think that's what the industry needs, right? You produce talents, and then at some point they help other startups to be successful.
Yeah, or they just go create their own companies eventually.
Or do their own startups.
Yeah, and like you're we'll get into that a little later, but you're certainly doing that now, and I'll let you talk about that a little later.
Mm-hmm.
Me being older, I've done it a number of times before too.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about Twitter a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Twitter and politics, that's become like a big topic lately, but Twitter and politics Twitter has had politics involved for quite a long time. And, me being in tech, I would join tons and tons of different technical things. Most of those things disappeared, but Twitter is one of them that last. So for example, like I've been on Twitter for a very, very long time, but it's only because I joined like everything that's technical in general. And I remember this is when I was like quite a bit younger, like in my 20s. And I remember that, being in my 20s, I was interested in politics, and some of the tweets I had were on politics. And what happened is that CNN started using Twitter, and they started posting the handle. I think it was like during when the US was involved in some wars in other places in the world. And all of a sudden, tons and tons of people came on Twitter, right? And for some weird reason, I had people start following me. And I mean, like nowadays, like the amount of followers I have is nothing, but like back then when you have thousands, it was actually quite a large amount.
Yeah.
And, so there was politics there. And I think eventually there was movements within the US Conservative Party to try to use Twitter. So there was a hashtag made, TCOT. I think it stood for Top Conservatives on Twitter.
Yeah.
And that kind of further galvanized Twitter into political usage. And people kind of spun that off. Like people created their own whatever letter OT on Twitter. And that kind of went off. And politics just kind of expanded from there.
Yeah.
There was also eventually the anti-war movement. So this was a combination of left-wing activists and libertarians who were against the war, and they used Twitter quite heavily. And then, so this is, I think, during the Bush era. And then when Obama took over, the libertarians stayed, but the left-wing activists left, and then the right-wing activists moved in, and then joined with the libertarians who were left in the anti-war movement. And they created the Tea Party, which is kind of interesting. That's the anti-war movement of the left and libertarians morphed into the Tea Party of the libertarians and the right. And then eventually there was these different springs. So I think like the Arab Spring and other thing. And there was a very positive view on Twitter being used for political change within these countries and passing message and coordination. And then more recently, it's been used for US politics. It's a very similar effect that I think it's been used in other countries, except this is looked negatively on. And there's been a lot of talk about, stopping it or controlling it or, moving in a certain direction they want. So I guess I just said a lot. So what are your thoughts on like all that?
Oh, wow. That's, talking about politics, I can probably listen to you talking about it for hours.
Yeah.
That's something that I know. I always know you're very passionate about. So when I look at Twitter, you look at the communication pattern there. We look at Facebook, for example. Facebook is all about the circles, right? It's all about friend circles. But when you look at Twitter, it's all about information propagation. Right, I think I mentioned early on why Twitter needs to exist. But when you look at politics, it's all about leaders and followers, right? Like who's the leader and who's following them, and then how does information propagate, right? It's kind of like a single direction, right? It's unlike Facebook, it's more like a bi-directional, but Twitter is like I think it's more kind of like a tree structure, right? And when we think about that, and that's a perfect fit for politics, right? It's all about propaganda, dissemination, and the old way is is not super efficient, right?
Yeah.
But then with Twitter, you literally you're faster than TV.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the breaking news actually comes out of Twitter rather than TV, rather than CNN. After Twitter came out. So when you look at the communication pattern, the way it's designed, it's almost a perfect tool for politics. Or just in general, any kind of tree structure communication, right? So I think politics is a perfect fit for that. So I'm not surprised at all. You see all these movements, whether negative or positive. There's you mentioned about the right wing, but on the other hand, there's also I remember I think it was in 2013 or 14. There's the Egyptian uprising.
Yeah.
And the government essentially shut down they shut down Twitter directly because it's too scary for them. And then people started using tools like Hootsuite to tweet it out because they shut down Twitter, but they didn't shut down us. So we can still, people can still use our tool to use Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So we see a huge kind of uptake in terms of usage from that region.
Yeah.
I think those are the really positive things, let people's voice be heard, without the censorship, right?
Yeah. There's I'll just point out one thing. The corporate version of propaganda usually gets called marketing. So it's also like used quite heavily by marketers too. Okay.
Okay, I think we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies because that's kind of your other thing. Can you tell the audience out there who may not know what is Bitcoin?
Maybe I'll just give a bit of a context, kind of my journey into the whole Bitcoin stuff. So the first time I heard about Bitcoin was really 2011 or 12 when there's kind of hit the major news because the price went up. When you look at the media, is the way media reacts to Bitcoin and all the crypto community is all about the price. When price goes up, the media reacts. when it goes down, nobody cares, you know. So essentially, you know, my first exposure was then. And then you know, like honestly, like I was pretty busy with, you know, the whole Hootsuite stuff, right? So I wasn't paying much attention. And also, you know, the way media depicted Bitcoin was pretty negative as well. So that essentially was how I think about it. It's a scam, it's a fraud, you know, it's not gonna work. And you know, that's how I think about, that's how I thought about Bitcoin pretty much until, you know, 2017. You know, that's when, you know, I got a chance to meet you know, someone, you know, like through a mutual introduction. And you know, his name is Franz, and he's very kind of into the whole crypto stuff. He's a very business savvy guy. You know, I like him a lot. But you know, I was just curious, like, why you are so into Bitcoin, right? And that caught my attention, and that's when I really took a deep dive into, you know, Bitcoin. Also, another technology called Ethereum, which is another type of blockchain, you know, programmable blockchain. Bitcoin is more like a fixed kind of currency, you know, where people transact. But Ethereum is more like a programmable, where you can actually write smart logic, you know, that solves a particular problem. So I started looking into that, and then did some kind of hacking, right? Did some hacking around the Ethereum, and then I look at the Hyperledger, which is more like a enterprise level blockchain as well. So I started looking into those, and from a technical perspective, you know, I realized the potential, which is, oh my God, you know, this is actually for real. You know, I don't really care about the, you know, the negativity or the media anymore, because at the end of the day, this is just science, right? You know, so that's kind of when I caught my attention. I really loved it, and that's also the time I realized, you know, this is something I want to do, you know, for the next while. So that's kind of, and that's the major reason why I moved on from Hootsuite and then started a new company called First Coin. With Franz, you know, became a business partner. So anyways, you know, so you know, what is Bitcoin? You know, the Bitcoin itself, I think it's probably good to explain that to two types of audiences. You know, the first audience, a group of audience is technical people, you know, who understands the technology, kind of you know, kind of behind it. And then the second group of audience is the non-technical people. So I think, you know, the way I explain about Bitcoin and the blockchain in general, about for technical people, is essentially, you know, a lot of the tradition, like existing technology, that you put them together to solve a new problem. You know, when you think about what's behind Bitcoin or blockchain, it's essentially distributed computing, it's a cryptography, you know, it's a consensus algorithm. You know, when you put them all together, and then plus the incentive mechanism, you know, which is really the revolution or the innovation there, that encourage good behaviors. Then you have an immutable ledger that is not controlled by any machine, right? It's so that's kind of essentially what it is. So I think, you know, from a technology perspective, that's how I explain it. This type of technology doesn't exist before, because you can't really reach consensus, you know, without any central party, right? That's kind of how it worked before. And I think, you know, when it comes to non-technical people, I think the way I look at Bitcoin is really a trust system, where, you know, you don't really need a middleman. You know, like, think about in the practical term, you know, you don't need an escrow, you know, when you buy or sell a house. You know, today, you know, when you sell your house, when you buy a house, you know, you give your money to an escrow other than the seller directly, because you don't trust them until you get the land title transfer, right?
Exactly.
So you always rely on a broker, a middleman, you know, escrow to hold the money until, you know, everything else is cleared. So with the blockchain technology, you know, I mean, it's gonna be in the future. It's not there yet. It's very new technology. But with blockchain technology, you can essentially, you know, create an atomic transaction, you know, all within the decentralized system, where you don't really need a broker anymore. And then you know, the land title transfer and the monetary transaction just happens as an atomic transaction at the same time.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think that's kind of the possibility that can enable.
Got it. Yeah. Got it.
Cool. Okay. So with Bitcoin, I think part of what made it really like a household name was the price. And you kind of got into this a bit. And I remember, it hit $10,000 per coin, US dollars. So that's probably like, 13,000 Canadian. And then it went up to 20,000 US. And, it attracted a lot of attention because there was money there. And part of it, it attracted technical people like ourselves into that. It also attracted investors, and some technical people are investors, but it also attracted the non-technical investors. It even like attracted scammers at one point. I remember, for example, there's a community in Vancouver that formed around Bitcoin in this one place called Decentral. It wasn't the first place. Like if you wanted to be involved with Bitcoin before, you had to go to libertarian meetups, and then eventually Decentral formed. And I think it's like a lot of those people of that political persuasion are hanging out there too.
Yeah.
But it was mostly like enthusiasts and people with technical backgrounds like ourselves. And eventually I noticed people entering who were very much outsiders. And I even remember people talking about like Ponzi schemes in a positive way, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But anyways, what do you think about, so, the coin went up to 10,000 and 20,000. There were people who got very, very wealthy from Bitcoin. What do you think about that?
I mean, like, when we look at the whole cryptocurrency and Bitcoin blockchain world, there's always two camps of people. There's the speculators. There's nothing wrong with speculation. I mean, the traditional financial industry is the same. The investment world is the same. There's the speculators, and then there's the people who like there's the innovators who actually leverage technology, to build something meaningful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the stock certainly has speculation. I mean, like there's some stock that gives dividends. Those are great, but like a lot of them don't give dividends. Like why isn't the value zero or pretty close to zero, right? Like a large part of it is speculation, just like you see with the cryptocurrencies. But there were like, for example, there were enthusiasts and people with technical backgrounds like ourselves who were just into Bitcoin very, very easily. And they were mining and they were enthusiastic about it. And then some of those people got like very, very rich too off it, which was quite interesting, like great for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's in a way, Bitcoin is kind of like a mechanism for wealth redistribution, in a way. I mean, I think there are many ways you can look at this, but I think I think my suggestion is to really focus on what the technology can enable, right? Like I think the price it goes up and down. I mean, is Bitcoin the final solution for decentralized currency? Like it could be, it may not be, it may be something else. Who knows? It's like in the 90s, Yahoo was the search engine, and now who's the search engine, right? So I think I think that can come and go. I do have a strong belief in Bitcoin's ability, to sustain very intense computation, because things like this takes a long time to prove. So I'm not too worried about Bitcoin, for the short term. But in the long term, by long term I'm talking about 20, 30, 50 years, right? That's really, because when you look at this is so transformative. This is so transformative that the effect won't be really felt until a long time later. It's just like technology in general in the 70s, 80s, things already started, but nobody felt anything until the 2000, the year 2000, right? I think it takes time.
Yeah, like even the internet. I mean, I remember back in the day, like telnets to access stuff. You you FTP'd and like downloaded whatever you wanted to download and tried desperately to find a program that can like say it was an image to view the image, or what documents you downloaded. It was quite different like way back then.
Oh yeah. It's just same as today. Like today, when you try to use an app, like what the people in the circle call it the distributed apps, like DApp, the app or DApp. It's like none of them are usable. Like I have probably literally 30 apps on my phone, and like the dApps on my phone, and none of them are really that usable, right? It's very cumbersome. The UX is literally non-existent. The only good apps that provide good UI are the portfolio kind of management apps. Essentially, can allow you to manage your investment portfolio in crypto. And then those are not new, right? Like, that you can. It's a parallel. It's parallel to the traditional kind of stock investment. So the UX for them is pretty much known, and replicate it. But other than that, the new world, the UX is literally non-existent. So it's really hard to use. And that will take time, like it takes a lot of the design people need to get into the world and really think about how to build a proper user experience using crypto apps, right?
Yeah. Did you we didn't plan this question, but like there was one application that was created by a group in Vancouver where we both are, called CryptoKitties. I don't remember if that was a D app, but it certainly used the blockchain. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. It is it is essentially, it's like it's very hard. It's not easy to have a clear cut. So CryptoKitty, they have this smart contract, they have the dApp, they also have centralized part. I think that there's a reason they did it that way. I think at the end of the day, it's usability, right? If they do everything in a decentralized way, then it's going to be very hard to use the app, right? Because things will be slow, cumbersome. So that's why they have like centralized part where speed and usability is really important, and then they have the blockchain, the dApp part where the smart contract part where the digital asset or collectives needs to be unique and trusted, and the ownership needs to be decentralized, right? You don't need a party to prove the ownership, right? So I think they did that pretty well in terms of applying the right technology to the right problem, and then put them all together, come out with the CryptoKitties.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that like CryptoKitties and other apps kind of like that are kind of part of like the hype? Like we'll see more things like that? Or
Yeah. I'm a big believer in. So when we look at digital CryptoKitties, it's essentially a digital. It's a bare digital asset, right? It's a bare digital asset. What I mean by that is naturally it's an asset that is purely represented by the digital form. You compare that, let's say, with the house.
Yeah.
The house is physical. You can't turn that into a matrix, right?
Yeah.
There are ways you can create a digital representation of the house, but at the end of the day, it's still a house, right? But for CryptoKitties, things like CryptoKitties is a pure digital, right?
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to when you look at blockchain, it's all about the value, transacting value, without a centralized party, right? So what is the very first kind of natural adopter of transacting value, on blockchain? It's the digital asset, right? It's just the most natural way. So when I look at CryptoKitties or a lot of the non-fungible tokens, that's behind digital CryptoKitties, I think that's where really like one of the first applications will come from. There are companies doing kind of digital document, proof, type of application on top of blockchain, which I think is a really nice kind of application as well. It's pure digital document, represented by blockchain, tamper proof, let's say agreement, a contract, things like that, right?
Yeah. You mentioned Ethereum before. Can you tell us kind of what is an ICO? Because I think that's another an acronym which a lot of people don't know what it is. So could you explain what it is?
Yeah, it stands for initial coin offering, and then there's many different terminologies now, like because of lots of different reasons, like for example regulation. There's an initial token offering, there's initial coin offering, there's an initial exchange offering, there's a security token offering. There's a lot of variations of that terminology, but at the end of the day, it's really just a capital raise mechanism. It's nothing new there. In the capital market, how do you make sure capital, how do you ensure you can pool capital together to create something, right? It's all about capital efficiency, and I think in terms of what's new in the ICO world. I think fundamentally, in the traditional world, you need bankers, or you need an investment bank, to make all the transaction happen, to raise the money, to form the legal structure, like to deal with the legal construct of raising that money, and then delivering that, and essentially, deal with the entire workflow. So, and that's not cheap, right? By the way, it's not cheap at all. Like you can pay literally, the commission is like several percent to over 10%.
Yeah,
that's kind of the commission. Yeah.
The impression I had with ICOs is an attempt by some people to kind of do their own thing. They didn't want to be part of the kind of system that the U.S. defines under securities law and accredited investors, and they just wanted to try something else. And later on, what happened is that the U.S. regulators, the SEC, decided, no, you're still a security. You still need accredited investors, and what you're doing is illegal. And they started throwing people in jail. I think that's a bit unfortunate, but definitely there's now people who have kind of embraced what the SEC is doing and trying to bring in regulation and compliance within this. And the people who wanted to kind of step out of the system really are kind of like SOL. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, the way ICO is being done in the past 2 years, like since the very beginning, initially, so it was always good purpose, right? Look at Ethereum. They are one of the very first, that did, like Mastercoin was before that, but Ethereum was pretty much the first major success, to raise money that way. And then look at where Ethereum is now. That's good intention, but then as anything, ICO is just a tool. It's a tool to achieve a purpose, and good people use it for good purpose, right? And then unfortunately, people saw that opportunity, and there are lots of, I would say, oh my God, it's I hate to say this, but I think in that crazy time, the majority of the projects were like fraud and scams.
Yeah. Like
it's really crazy. So yeah, I mean that's the problem though, right? Like, the good and bad always come together.
Yeah, and for people like us, I think it's a bit easier to tell which one's a scam and which one's not. But there were a lot of just normal people that got attracted by the high price in Bitcoin, and also attracted by how much money was being raised ICOs, and just couldn't tell the difference, right?
Yeah. Totally,
and
yeah.
I think there's you can interpret some of the actions of the SEC as validly like trying to deal with that fraud and the scams just to kind of protect people.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, they also crushed the people who weren't trying to scam anyone. They were just trying to they didn't want to be part of that system. They wanted to create something new.
I think ultimately, when we look at the innovation, the evolution of cryptocurrency and ICOs, like for that matter, at the end of the day, if things kept happening the way it happened before, then the whole space will fail. Because at the end of the day, people will realize this whole thing is a scam, right? So nobody will care anymore. So I think it is important to have some sort of regulation, whether that's from ICC or from self-regulatory organization. Like there's got to be some rule set to set parameters to make sure that scammers doesn't prevail at the end. So I think from that regard, I really appreciate what I see, like the regulators. In the US it's called ICC, and in Canada there's provincial regulators like the BCIC and the Ontario Security Commission, the Canadian Security Association.
Yeah.
Like they're doing the right things in terms of regulating this. Obviously, they're not the fastest kind of mover in the whole space. So it creates a lot of delays and frustrations.
Yeah, there's also some challenges. Like a lot of them don't have a technical background and don't really understand the stuff.
Yeah. I think I think that is really the unfortunate part.
Yeah,
I think getting the bad guys in jail, I welcome that.
Yeah, so there's also, and I don't think this solves all the problem, but there's definitely, there's a lot of people involved in that space, in whether you want to call it Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or blockchain. Like blockchain is basically the business-friendly way of saying cryptocurrency. If you look at all the people there, there's a certain line of thought that argues that regulation should happen through code. That it's the smart contracts that regulate, it's the blockchain that regulates, that they don't want regulators. And I'm not saying that's a good point of view. I'm not saying it's a bad point of view. But what do you think of that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, because at the end of the day, who writes the code, right? I mean, if you're just regulating the code, who regulates the coder, right? I mean, Yeah, I mean, really simple as that. So I think, there's different governance level, right? Like, there's the level where, you need to regulate the people, the processes, and then, I think, when it comes to code, it's more about automation. It's all about a certain rule enforcement. I think that can help. For example, let's say capital market. In the capital market, part of the regulation in the traditional world is, if a credit investor invested in, a particular stock or share, so for a private company, then there's a lot of transfer restriction, right? So that transfer restriction, it can be regulated within the source code, because you can literally write a smart contract where, the share, the ownership is locked up, that cannot be transferred to anyone else. So those are the things that you can transfer. But then who regulates the actual private company trying to raise money? Who regulates the, promoting their product, their private offering, and by saying a lot of lies to the investors.
I'll ask you another question. It's a bit tough. Who regulates the regulators?
Yeah, I mean, I hope, our taxpayer money is put to good use. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, it's kind of like singularity.
It's kind of like the Force. Like there's the light and the dark, and we must find balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is unfortunate, in a way that the regulators, they're not really moving fast enough, and there's a reason behind that, because, I mean, I actually personally dealt with the BCSC, the BC regulator, and Ontario Security Commission for quite a bit while I was doing the whole, while I was involved, and that they are, they really want to help. They're learning. I actually delivered a couple of workshops and presentations to the regulators. They're really learning. They're trying their best, but then they got their hands full just by the day-to-day activities already, and getting funding is not quick for them, right?
Yeah.
So they are actually going the extra mile to try to try. But it's just definitely not fast enough in terms of compared with the whole innovation happening.
Yeah. So I was at one point I was kind of going around to some of these Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, blockchain meetings, and at one of them there was a couple of gentlemen from Switzerland, and they were trying to attract entrepreneurs and technical people to come over there and set things up. And Switzerland seems to be divided up. I think it's a canton, so they can have their own kind of regulations and stuff like that, their own decision. And they were trying to get people to come in. The challenge was that immigration to Switzerland is limited per year. So if you wanted to go to the canton, it was actually quite tough. Another country, eventually, and I made a trip there. I was trying to understand the regulatory environment they're setting up. But another country named Malta. So it's in the Mediterranean, just south of Italy. It's actually quite nice there. If you go there in October, November, it's like a Vancouver summer. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can handle their actual summer. I'd probably die. But it's a fantastic during the winter, right? Yeah. And they're trying to innovate. They're trying to make it so, for example, that people can raise money with an ICO. So you can kind of step out of the classic system with credit investors and securities. And the thing about this is that one thing I realized at a certain point, not everyone realizes, is that most people are not legally permitted to invest in things, right? It's only certain people that can invest. And it's basically like the idea is that, you want to invest in this, you want to get rich, right? Like, well, are you rich already? Like, no, okay, then you can't get rich, right? Which is like, it feels like a scam, to me. Yeah. But anyways, that's the system that we live under. But Malta was trying to open things up a bit, and they were trying to make it so you could do legal ICOs. And it's really crowdfunding in the sense that you can raise from everyone. Yeah. And what I discovered is Malta is a bit of a victim of their own success. A lot of companies went there. And there was a period where a bunch of people came over. I think Behance, is that the name of it? What's the Hong Kong exchange? Binance, right? Yeah. They went over there, and there was a bunch of companies that went over there, set up shop, and it's great for them. Yeah. And then the regulators tried to set up a kind of environment to kind of, I guess, control it and do things safely. And what happened is there were so many people that the regulators couldn't keep up with the applications for licensees. And there was also requirements eventually of having a certain kind of officer within the company. And I think it had to be a lawyer. And I think the person could be one on many companies, but because there was a limited amount of people who could do that, the price went way, way, way up, right? And it made it unaffordable for anyone who wanted to start a company there. And I have a friend of mine, Alex, he was over there trying to do it, and he kind of just like walked away eventually. And like I was there trying to understand the environments of maybe setting up an office. Just to say it, like myself and Lauren, we have an incubator / search lab. So both of us have been in tech for quite a while, and both of us have created companies. But right now, we kind of through this like create a whole bunch of companies. So we're looking at possibly creating an office over in Malta to do business out of there. But we haven't done it yet. I mean, like personally, I'd love to be in Malta on a regular basis just because the weather's fantastic in the winter. But
I mean,
that it's tough to raise money makes it a little less attractive. Although the tax situation is quite nice relative to Canada, so it still makes it attractive.
Yeah, I mean I mean, like what you meant. I mean, I think first of all, there's actually quite a lot of options. Singapore, Switzerland, Malta, Gibraltar, even Cayman. Like there's quite a few places like but Belarus. It's another kind of country that is so crypto friendly. I think smaller economies. They're more nimble, right? They can adjust their regulation pretty quickly, unlike Canada and the US, which is so established, hundreds of years. It's very hard to make a change.
Yeah.
So it's kind of unfortunate for us, from kind of blockchain innovation perspective. But then I think just one point you mentioned that is really interesting, and that was exactly why we kind of created First Coin Capital was, how can we create a more inclusive and efficient kind of capital market, where it's not just the rich get richer, like the restrictions is at the end of the day, what the object, like the first, go back to the first principle, like when it comes to investing, you want to protect the investors, right? You want to be capital efficient, and you also want to protect the investors so they don't get frauded. So so that's really the purpose. Right, I think, and then you look at the regulation that evolved over the past however many years, 50, 60 years probably, and it evolves into creating a lot of rules to protect the investors based on the old school mechanism, right? But then when blockchain came out, again, at a fundamentally, it's a decentralized trust system, right? So the delivery mechanism is very different from traditional world. So I think the regulation accordingly to protect the investors, to make it more capital efficient, needs to be different as well. So that is the challenge that regulators are facing, and also the innovators are facing, right? It's a kind of cat and mouse game, right? Like the innovators go fast, and then the regulators start chasing, and then slow down a little bit. So I think there's going to be like that back and forth. But fundamentally, I think blockchain technology itself, as a tool, can really facilitate. It's not going to solve the world problem for sure, but I think it's a tool that can really sort of facilitate a way more efficient and more inclusive capital market. I think moving forward in the future, and I still believe in that. Today. Yeah.
Can you tell me more about First Coin and what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I think just quickly, after I mentioned earlier on, started First Coin. So what we built is kind of a product and software based investment banking system. Where I think when we realized there are so many kind of investment bankers in the crypto world who are not licensed, and are still doing a lot of things, paper and pencil based, like the old school way.
Yeah.
The alternative we saw is, can we actually first of all get a license, like a broker dealer license? So actually, personally, I'm a licensed broker dealer in Canada.
Okay.
By passing exams and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So and then the company itself, trying to acquire an EMB license, exotic market dealer license. So first of all, license, and then second of all, building a product that facilitates, the workflow of a capital raise. So that's kind of what we did. And then mid last year, kind of got acquired by a New York-based company called Galaxy Digital, and I think they were doing it wasn't a technology company. It's more about a traditional financial company, like institution, but more but focused on crypto.
Okay.
So they do asset management. They do a lot of trading activities, and and a VC, a VC principal, a VC PE type of investment. And I think investment banking is something that they want to expand into. So that's kind of how the acquisition happened. I think just in general with the market downturn, and it's just not really that much investment banking business happening. So I think at the end of the day, we decided to to part our ways and then move on. So that's when I started a new company. I took kind of the tech team with me, and I started a new company. I think we are still trying to figure out exactly what we are trying to do right now. But have a pretty good idea of the problem that we are trying to solve.
Okay.
I think just quickly, I think right now, there are three things happening that we're trying to kind of put together and figure out how we can solve that. So the first thing is you have these large companies, tech companies. There's the technical talent monopoly going on.
Yep.
Right. Like those I probably won't say the names, but you all know all the names. Like the big companies, they're paying so much money for the tech talents and hoarding them, right? I think that's one thing happening, and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse because those companies, their stock keeps going up, and the salaries keeps going up, and people are not leaving. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's one thing happening, and the other thing happening is starting a company is really easy today. Compared with before, it's getting easier and easier every year. You have the Amazon, the Google Cloud, and then they give you lots of credits. And so essentially you don't have to worry about the hardware and the cost associated, anytime soon. And then there's a WeWork, shared office, there's a fractional C, whatever O's, right? Like the CFOs or CTOs or CMOs, those are all fractional. So you don't have to hire a full-time person, but still have access to the expertise. And just government incentives and everything. When you think about it, starting a company is really easy. And I think the battleground is really shifting towards building a successful company, mostly around, getting the right talent into the company. So I think as far as I know, most of the startups, the majority of the startups are really starving for talent.
Absolutely.
Right. So large company hoarding, monopolizing talents.
Yeah.
Startups, they're starving for them. And the third thing happening is, I guess it's kind of caused by this phenomenon. There's this section of this. When you look at the engineers, there's when you put the engineers into a spectrum in terms of risk taking. There's people on the left who are I can work for a company for 20 years as long as I get paid well, I will never leave.
Yeah.
That's fine, right? That's one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum is the engineers who have $500 in their bank, and then they will still quit their job and then start their own company, right? So those are the two spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think there's a segment of engineers kind of who are trapped in terms that they're not really ready to. They're not able to take that financial risk, to join a startup or start their own company yet.
Yeah.
But they really want to do so.
Yeah.
Right. So they figure out different ways. Right. They do some side work, side freelancing, to make some extra cash, and then they do their own experiments. In terms of coming up with a startup idea and build the product and see if they can take off. Most likely it's not going to take off because we talked about this early on. Startup is not about building a software, right? It's solving a real problem. So I think there's this group of people who are really trapped.
Yeah.
There's really no good option for them, no good alternatives. When you think about the financial risk, that's real, right? You think about the friction, joining a startup, pick a winner. You're gonna spend 2 to 4 years commit to that and really, hoping that it'll be successful. So 2 to 4 years of your life is pretty important, right? It's pretty significant. So you want to pick a winner, but it's so hard to pick a winner. Who do you pick? It takes a VC's job to pick a winner, and they are not even doing a good job of that. Let alone an individual engineer who are not really well networked, right? So I think, and then they have to do so many interviews, like 5 interviews in one company. You explore 3 startups. That's 15 interviews. That's like 15 hours. It's very exhausting. So anyway, so I think there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of financial risk. I think when you put all the 3 things together, the big corporates, the startups, and the people, the problems. I think the overall innovation is really suffering. The overall economy is not benefiting because this group of people, they are what I call them the startup engineers. They're entrepreneurial. They have the growth mindset. They think about customer and business problems more than the code perfection.
Yeah.
They iterate really fast. This group of people, they're not where they should be. I think that is really the problem.
Do you think that's a Vancouver problem?
No, it's a worldwide problem. Okay. I think it's particularly true in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Because of the dramatic difference between, the U.S. exchange rate, the U.S. company paying so much, and then the real estate market in Vancouver. I think in Toronto, Vancouver is the same thing. In North America, probably true. It's just different degrees, right? I think it's a general problem.
It might be also like an education problem. Like a lot of people who become like nowadays, like programmers, software engineers, software developers, whatever you want to call it, or hacker, they come a very traditional routes. Like I think people from my generation might have had a different approach. Like I was creating my first company I created. I was in university still. I mean, it was a complete flop. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I suspect it was a bit more common back then. Although I think only a small fraction of people ever tried that kind of thing, anyways.
Yeah. I mean, like I think for you, you like the financial risk for you is not that, it's not bad, right? It's like I think there's this segment of people who are really trapped because of all the risks that I mentioned earlier on. So I think what I'm trying to do is I'm working with my team and my partner. To figure out the solution. Can we design a alternative employment for this specific group of people, where I can, remove the financial and financial risk and the frictions, and provide them an environment where they can contribute, to different startups, leveraging their expertise. And these people are learning machines. So can I also offer them an opportunity to learn different technologies? Some people who are really good at DevOps, let's say, they want to learn blockchain technology. So, and learning by watching YouTube videos doesn't help, right? So it's for these people, it's more about learning by doing, but actually doing meaningful work. So can I create work for these people to learn, learn kind of more in a more hands-on environment, and then kind of explore. Meaning exploring, the next opportunity that they really want to commit to for the longer term. So can we design an employment like that, right? That it's not even an employment anymore, right? It's more about the buffer, for these people where they come in, they go through the experience, essentially, they come in, recharge, they elevate, they explore, and at the end of the day, within a few months or within a year, they find the opportunity that they can really commit to for the next 2 to 4 years, and then by contributing, by learning, they already know the quality of the company, the founders, the team, there's already the try before. It's kind of like the try before you commit approach, right?
Got it.
For both sides, for the companies and for the engineers, right? Yeah. And then you don't have to commit to each other right away, like. That's how it happens today, right?
Yeah. So and kind of like a career trial and upgrade thing.
Yeah. It's something like that, right? I think it's very hard to solve that problem just by pure recruiting, right? Like you put the artificial intelligence, like machine learning, to this thing. I still think that's only optimization problem. Yeah. That's not fundamentally solving the problem. So I think the fundamental approach is really giving people a buffer where they can decide where is their next long-term commitment.
Do you have a name for this?
We have a template, like we have a name.
Okay.
The name is called a commit.
Okay.
It's not about relationships, by the way. Yeah. So it's I kind of I take the word out of the developer's workbook, right? Because every developer commit code. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every single day. And also it's all about, this organization committing, a career path, not the manager track, not the technical guru track, but more like an entrepreneurial startup track, right? This is where we come in, we commit to provide that opportunity to you. And then we commit to, the actual startups that, we would have a turnkey, ready to go startup engineers, to help you on your project. And then also, for future employment as well.
Okay.
There's a good mutual match.
So are you at the point where you're accepting applicants yet?
So I have a working prototype already. I have several clients, and among client number 7, to be exact, and also I have about 10 engineers. That working within this model. So I'm definitely talking to people, like to engineers. Anyone interested? Definitely, I'm very open to chat. But I want to do this kind of gradually,
okay, so
slowly. Yeah.
So you have like a closed beta right now.
Yeah, I call it a closed beta. Yeah.
Okay, so eventually, not now, eventually you're going to get to the point where you'll be accepting applicants and people can apply and maybe join, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. I want to be mindful of your time because we've been running and we have lots more questions, but we're going to not do all those. But Lauren had some questions from, just the audience. And I think she can go over those with you.
Yeah, so we crowdsourced some questions from a couple of communities that we're a part of. And you can do this via Twitter or Slack. We always want your questions out there. But here are some of the questions. The first one comes from the Product BC Slack channel. And it's, do you feel the reported Kool-Aid culture at Hootsuite is a problem? And what would you have done differently if you had the chance?
Yeah, wow, that's a tough one. Yeah, so to answer the question directly, yes, absolutely. But I think there's always a reason behind that. When you look at the evolution, I think for any company, when you start, you have certain culture, right? And then that culture evolves, and some can be unintentionally become toxic, right? And some just become more valuable and bigger, right? So I think the lesson I've learned is that I wouldn't change anything that just evolves naturally, organically. The Kool-Aid culture, it worked for a period of time.
Yeah.
But it stopped working at some point, right? So I think the lesson I've learned is more around how can you design your how can you evolve with your organization together as an individual?
Yeah.
Meaning while your organization keeps evolving, are you following that or ahead of that or just stalling, like a stall, right?
Yeah.
So just specifically, I think a great mentality to always keep, to always have is continuous improvement, continuous feedback and continuous improvement, where, you always constantly, watch out what's happening, what's working, what's not working, as a team or as a whole organization, and realize the problems and come up with solutions, again, as a team or as an organization to solve that problem. Absolutely. So problem like the Kool-Aid culture, whatever it's called, that can be detected, or the sooner the better. Then you'll kill it before it becomes too late, right?
Totally.
So I think, whatever it is, it's technology, processes, culture, market, whatever it is, right? That's always the mentality you should have.
I think that's a really good way to put it, is continuous improvement. I've seen a lot of companies where that kind of culture kind of just keeps going, and it keeps going deeper, because even if a company is looking at that culture and saying, well, that's not good, let's make it better. But really, you used a really good word, evolve, which means it could go in a different direction. And I think a lot of companies get trapped in the let's get better, which kind of narrows your focus sometimes, and you really have to think about evolving together to go in different directions. Really good point. So we already asked if you were a hacker. Here's a good question. How do you decide what technologies to keep up with, and how do you study and learn these technologies?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the technology evolution is crazy. There's so many tech, like
Yeah.
yeah, like the way I think about it is experience matters less now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, what is your past experience? Like, have you been in the industry for 10 years? That, like, are you qualified because you have experience? Like, I think experience matters less and less now. I don't mean it doesn't matter anymore. It's just like matters less and less. It's more about your ability to learn, to consume the new information and new technology and new knowledge.
Absolutely.
How your mentality, your ability, right? Like, I think, you have to be on the constant lookout of what's happening in the tech industry today. Not just the technology itself, but also the processes, the practice, right? And also being able to kind of like, I don't mean like chase shiny objects all the time, but really kind of follow the trend of what's happening, be aware of that, and then pick one or two to get yourself familiar with, right? So I think that should always happen. So I mean, for me, it's like learning is always better, when we are learning hands-on. Like, again, there's Udemy, there's Coursera, there's a bunch of different things. I think those are great. Those are great starting point, but you don't really learn much for real. Like, those are more information purpose, right? At the end of the day, you only learn, what's possible with those tools, with those kind of shallow approach. When you only learn deep when you actually work on something meaningful. Kind of goes back to what I mentioned early on the problem I'm trying to solve. Like, today there's no environment for people to really learn something meaningful. Like, when you work at a big company, like, you're not going to learn unless the company adopts something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, your alternative is essentially joining a startup who use that technology, but then the friction is really high. And it's like, you don't want to just quit your company and join a startup just for the sake of learning something meaningful, right? Yeah. So that's kind of why, kind of back to that, can we design something, to actually enable them to learn something more meaningful and hands-on?
Absolutely. I think we have one last crowdsourced question. So you started at Hootsuite with only a few years of experience. I don't know if this person knows you or not, but that's what the question says.
Well, it's on my LinkedIn, I guess.
But you made many of the important architectural decisions early on in the company. How did you make these decisions at that time?
Good question. Actually, I just said, experience doesn't matter that much. I mean, literally, like, okay, let me put it this way. Like, when you are chased by a tiger, you run as fast as you can. I think, I think, back in the days, I think the first year, was pretty calm. Like, my focus was really just writing code and writing features. Doing my job, right? But then, when the thing took off, when there's so much traffic and the system goes down all the time, it's really painful period of time, right? I got, personally, I was on call, no rotation, just personally on call for 5 years. You talk about rotation, all that stuff. Like, never happened to me for a good half years. Yeah. So when you wake up at night all the time, you do whatever it takes to not get caught again, the next night. Yeah. So I think, there's a lot of external pressure, to force me to learn as much as I can. Yeah. And, to on the architectures and everything. And at the end of the day, it's also not just myself, right? There's a team. It's a team effort as well. So I think, I mean, I made a lot of mistakes as well. It's not to say, all the decisions were right. I made mistakes on, making some wrong tries on certain technology. It happened a lot, and then, it took a lot of effort to clean up, right? Yeah. So I think, it's not all kind of good stories. There's bad and worse stories as well. So I think, at the end of the day, you learn as fast as you can, and then you adapt. You don't live on the old technology all the time, and then duct tape it. You try to adopt something new. We were the early adopters of Amazon. Essentially, in 2007 or 8, we started using Amazon. Everything, no bare metals. And then we were one of the very early adopters of MongoDB, the document the data store. We are early adopters of Scala, as a programming language.
Yeah.
We are very, very early adopters of the whole HashiCorp kind of tool set. When we adopted HashiCorp, Mitchell and Armand, they are like 5-person company. Now they are a multi-billion-dollar business, right? So it's So I think but then some of the tries were wrong. Then we have to deal with that. So I think that's kind of how I would put it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna segue into a different style of question. This is what I guess I'll call rapid fire, and I'm gonna ask some questions that are meant to be like 1-word, 2-word answers.
Yeah.
And they're kind of more meant to be fun.
Okay. All right.
So, off the hot seat. Okay, first question. Do you watch Game of Thrones?
Yes.
And who is your favorite character?
No favorite.
No favorite?
No favorite.
Okay, who would you be?
Yeah, okay, let me be honest with you. Like I watch Game of Thrones really to kill the time.
Got it.
Yeah, that's kind of it's a big fan.
Yeah.
It's just like everybody's watching it. What's the fuss about it? And I watched the first 6 seasons and I stopped.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have 2 left.
Yeah.
one and a bit. Okay. What did you eat for breakfast?
A variety.
Maybe they're harder than I think.
Variety. Variety.
What's the last book that you read?
Running Beam. Yeah, actually, it's literally the last book I read. Yeah, awesome. It's a highly recommended. Like I read. I read kind of the lean startup like a long time ago.
Yep.
But it's more kind of theoretical, right?
Got it.
And when I was doing startups lately, I pick up the Running Lean book. It's by the author's name is Ash. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a very practical book.
Awesome.
Highly recommend it. Yeah.
Add to your book lists. What is the color of your toothbrush?
It's blue.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't even know the color of my toothbrush.
My blue, yeah, I'm a blue guy. A blue ocean.
Blue everything.
Yeah.
Dogs or cats?
Both.
Both?
Yeah, I have both. Yeah.
Okay, one last question. What emoji do you use most?
Upside down smelling.
No, the one I use the most is like the awesome kind of emoji, like awesome. Because the team is really awesome. Everything they do is awesome. So I use that a lot.
Awesome emoji.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So we're going to wrap up because we want to respect your time. Is there anything else you want our audience to know or take away from today?
I think just the problem, like the question I would throw out there is really like a call for action. I think the problem I'm trying to solve right now, this whole technical talent issue that exists today. How would you solve it? Right? Like it's gotta be solved one way or another. Because if nobody does anything, the talent shortage will just keep getting worse. The rich companies will just keep getting richer because they suck up all the talents, and the startups is gonna get harder and harder and harder to do. So who's gonna solve that problem? I think especially for the engineers who are really trapped.
Yep.
Who's gonna solve that problem? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Definitely reach out to me if you have some thoughts on that.
Yes. Reach out to Beier if you're interested in helping him be the Peter Pan of this problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Beier. It was so awesome talking to you. Next time, we're going to be talking to Bruce Sharp, who is an expert in machine learning and electric cars. So you can tune in for that next live episode on Tuesday, May 7th at about 1 p.m. And please, if you've got questions for Bruce, tweet or DM us at Hey Tech Station.
Okay, so I'm going to sign off. We're going to go off, and we're off.